Hey, it's Sam, and I'm making this video on the upcoming eclipse of October 18th. Now, the eclipse is happening, around 7 o'clock Pacific time, 7 o'clock Eastern time on Friday night, the 18th. Now, this is a powerful eclipse. Of course, they're all powerful, and it's also what's called the blood moon, which is the moon that comes after the harvest moon. And I'm not sure why it's called blood moon, maybe because it's in Aries often, at least sidereal Aries. It's an interesting thing to ponder. But this is in Aries, early degrees of Aries, Ashwini Nakshatra, which is ruled by the twin horses, the Ashwin Kumars of Indian thinking, of Indian lore. Now, Ashwini literally is two horses, and the Ashwins, the Ashwin Kumars, are two horses, and we want to get those horses running in the same direction. They can be somewhat misdirected at times, and it's that quality of Aries that's very enthusiastic and excited and charging forward quickly. One of the great things about Vedic astrology is you have the sidereal zodiac, which has an integration of signs and nakshatras. The signs aren't just 12 zodiac signs. Within the sign of Aries, you have 2¼ nakshatras. You have the nakshatra of Ashwini, the nakshatra of Bharani, and the nakshatra and the first pada of the nakshatra called Kritika. So these are three different qualities of the sign Aries. So that first part of Aries is, like I said, Ashwini, which has to do with these two horses charging forward. Now, the way that the Indians and the way all cultures used to harness the power of horses or animals is to literally harness them, yoke them together. If you just have two horses and you're just kind of sitting behind two horses, they might run in different directions. Now, they could be trained, but usually what you do is you have something that connects them, like at the shoulder, like a harness, where they can't run in different directions. So keep this in mind. It's that quality of Aries that's enthusiastic and passionate and charging off into new experiences. Aries is a sign where we understand the need to follow our individuality, our individual enthusiasm, and we realize that if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. So there's that transformative quality of Aries. It's really about change and transformation through sudden events. So it could be a lot of sudden, shocking events, especially psychological or emotional. Be careful reacting to something psychologically and something that feels a certain way emotionally, so you do something that's somewhat damaging and self-destructive. I will say this, there are a lot of people, obviously, that have Saturn, like in their natal chart, Saturn in Aries. Saturn was debilitated in Aries from like late 69 to early 72, I think, or something like that, right around that time. So people who were born around that time, you're having this transit happening right over your debilitated Saturn. For instance, when you get eclipses over difficult planets, it creates confusion in the mind, and I just use that as an example. But you want to be careful in any sense, but certainly in the sense of doing something impulsive that you might regret. Because, as I say, it's the moon we're talking about, and it's being eclipsed in Aries, so we want to be careful and not do things that sabotage our own emotional peace and happiness. Now, in addition, the moon has joined the South Node, so the South Node brings a kind of conjuring up from the past. There might be a lot of feeling of finishing and completing karmas, completing like past life karmas, also completing karmas from our childhood. Ketu is deeply related to our childhood. We talk about past lives, but really it's kind of sloppy astrology to bring in past lives because those things can't be verified. We get everything in each lifetime that we need to work on. So you can see a person's childhood, you can see the important aggregate lessons of a person's childhood, of a person's past lives, by their childhood. Childhood is really like the culmination of our past lives in a very condensed form. We didn't choose it, it just happened to us, and we find ourselves there. And then our, you might say, free will, or the new soul that the new territory that the soul needs to conquer comes afterward. And again, this is related to the nodal axis. The childhood and the past lives and the culmination of our soul is related to Ketu, and then after that, Rahu is the soul conquering new territory in this lifetime. So we have Ketu moon conjunction. It's Ketu that's eclipsing the moon, so there could be a lot of this feeling of finishing old karmas, certainly things from childhood that we understand consciously, a lot of perhaps difficult routines from childhood that have to do with domination and self-will and where we didn't get to do something. And again, any planets that someone has along that Aries Libra axis, especially planets in Aries, we need to be careful of. If you have difficult planets there, like for instance Saturn or Mercury or Venus, you might find some of those energies being eclipsed. So we have a lot of planets also in we have Rahu and Saturn are in Swati Nakshatra in Libra, and that's related to the god Hanuman, the god of service, the god of heroism, and also the god who was the general of the army of monkeys. He was the king of the monkeys. And this is a parable for the mind, and that the mind is like a bunch of monkeys running all around. And so if you can harness the power of the mind, it's like the power of Hanuman, that power of prana and vayu and wind to act with power and heroism. And then rather than dispersing our energy and scattering indiscriminately, which is one of the problems of Swati, we actually are able to disperse and like get our message out to the wind, you might say. So this is a big benefit right now. It's good for public relations and getting the truth out. There's also the sun is just moving into Libra, just debilitated when this eclipse happens, very early Libra. So again, our personal strength and personal power and personal, you might say, pride or dignity might be feeling at an all-time low because the sun is debilitated and it's joined Saturn and Rahu. A couple of weeks later, we're going to have that solar eclipse in Libra. I'll talk more about that, but it's a pretty heavy one because the sun would then be eclipsed, debilitated, join Saturn. So the sun has moved into a difficult place. So again, we might be really acting from a place where we're not confident, coming from a place of a lack of confidence, a lack of enthusiasm. So again, you want to be careful of doing things that subvert your needs and that have you acting from a place of weakness during this whole eclipse cycle. And we also have Mercury in Libra as well, which is bringing more communication and skill around those things. The other very important quality, though, especially with the Saturn, Rahu, and those planets in Libra, is they're getting aspected by Jupiter. So Jupiter is extending his grace from Gemini to the sign of Libra, where we have Saturn, Rahu, and the Sun and Mercury. So there's a lot of lessons that we're learning around relationships and our interactions with others because these are in the sign of Libra. So it's a great time to be learning about ourselves in relationship to others and hopefully cultivating a healthy relationship with solitude. Saturn, Rahu in Libra is really about solitude. So again, this is an important lunar eclipse, which is the halfway point of a solar cycle. And so you'll feel the mind eclipsed in Aries. There could be irritability, clarity, but aggravation. The moon wants connection. Aries is about clarity, distinction, and action. So you might be taking emotional actions or acting emotionally. But you want to be careful to not be distracted and diverted. One of the great powers of Ashwini is also that it's the physicians of the gods. The story of Ashwini goes like this. A long time ago, when the sun was so overbearing that his wife had to leave for a while to get away, the wife of the sun installed her sister as a double so that she could take a little vacation because the sun was so overbearing. The sun didn't notice this, and he wound up having affair with his wife's twin sister, and they wound up having children, and this whole thing that happened that the sun didn't realize. Then when the wife came back, she saw what had happened, and she got so mad that she ran away, and then turned herself into a horse and ran away. And then the sun turned himself into a horse and followed her down to earth, and then they made up and they made love, and the result was the Ashwin Kumars. So the Ashwins, who are the deities of Ashwini, are the progeny of the sun and his wife, and he left the twin horses here to be the physicians on earth, and they are said to be the originators of Ayurveda and things like that. So I tell this story because it's deep energetic healing medicine that's possible now. But again, it's possibility, it's potential, because the initial response of Ashwini is to act, to take action, external action, like two horses running around. You need to yoke them, you need to calm them down, and it's really about energetic healing, internal energetic medicine related to prana, related to wisdom about how energy moves, rather than wisdom about energy moving externally in some kind of rash, sort of random event. Try to be more introspective and have the energy be more internalized, rather than learning how energy works by making all these outer mistakes, like, oh, what if I do this? Like a child who doesn't really know the difference yet between, playing with something and learning from it and pulling a pot of water off the stove. This is very Aries energy. Oh, what happens if I do this? At some point we learn that as a mature adult, the real important actions are not out here in the world, they're in here. Having said that, we have to change our outer circumstances too, but with the moon being eclipsed in Aries, it's not really the time to take drastic action. The sun in Aries, that's something different. When we had the solar eclipse 6 months ago and the sun went through Aries and it was exalted, actually the sun wasn't in Aries when it was eclipsed. Oh yes it was, sorry, thinking out loud. So that's different. So the moon is not where we're necessarily acting. Actions through the moon are confusing because they're emotional. Emotional action, emotional speaking. The moon is the heart and how we feel. This is why the moon in general, when I talk about the moon a lot, it's really our consciousness. And Aries is a sign of action. So having the moon eclipsed in this sign of action, especially with Ketu, the south node, which has a lot of criticism and a lot of tangled up kind of hidden, buried things, shows where we could be really acting from some confused place and regretting it. So be aware of that. Take care. And if you're interested in seeing how this is going to affect your sign, you can get a 2-week trial to my member site for only 1 penny. You'll really like it. So anyway, stay cool and enjoy this eclipse time. And I also have a webinar, a free web class that you can get that talks about all of the, how this lunar or how this eclipse cycle is going to affect all of the 12 signs, including you. So check that out as well.